Hey, thank you so much for listening to Reversing Climate Change. This is Ross Kenyon. I'm the host of the show. The sponsor is Eco Engineers. Oh, Eco Engineers. What isn't Eco Engineers? I've had a really great vantage point of carbon dioxide removal. And so often I'll start talking with a company and they will say something like, oh, well, we've been working with Eco Engineers for a while now, either trying to build this methodology or just trying to figure this project out, trying to get the quantification right, trying to figure this MRV out. That has happened to me so many times. And I've been glad to see them have so much success with so many companies in our space. Eco Engineers is essentially a consultancy that helps carbon removal tech and project developers get to market effectively. If you've ever started a company, one of the early decisions that you're going to need to make is which of these things can we bring in-house and which of these things do we need to pay consultants for? And often the conventional knowledge here is that it always makes sense to bring stuff in-house if you can. But I think bringing in very experienced consultants early on can save projects a lot of time and money. For instance, you might end up on the phone with David LaGreca. David's going to be on the podcast soon. And David has done, dozens of methodologies within the voluntary carbon market. And if you could just get on the phone with David for a little bit and you are trying to bring a new methodology or protocol to market, you have some new approach, you're a biochar project and you're trying to figure out, given your technology, region, biomass availability, what is the best way for me to work within the options that I have available to me? That's a person that you could very easily be paired with. David will likely shave off time and money from what would otherwise be a process that is pretty overwhelming. And that's just the start of it too. Eco has been engaged with people I've known or worked with, from everything from project design to the actual MRV plans, doing the LCA itself, registering the project, doing the diligence support, feasibility studies, tech evaluations, market eligibility. I feel like they're halfway to being an EPC without actually being an EPC for some of these things. Sometimes you don't necessarily need one person full-time thinking only about your project. Sometimes it makes sense to get 10 people on a fractional basis who have worked on collectively hundreds or maybe thousands of projects. Whether or not that will be the way for your company to go, you'll have to take the calls to figure it out. And I very much think you should do that. The link is in the show notes if you'd like to get in touch with Eco Engineers. Tell them Ross Kenyon sent you. And also, 2 quick points of really fun news. Rudy Krebiel is going to be on the show sometime soon. We've been scoping a show for so long. He's one of those friends of mine that we're always trying to find the right container for a discussion between us. And because we speak so often, it always seems like you can delay and wait a little bit to do it. So Rudy's coming on soon. I'm really excited to have him on. The 2026 Eco Forums training series that Eco Engineers is putting on is coming out soon. It's a carbon markets training. It's on July 28th. You'll get to hear how experts approach real world, practical, how do we do carbon markets? How do credits work, where they think the market is heading, and how to turn those global carbon trends into a smarter strategy than what many people likely have now. If you're listening to this after July 28th, you can go to ecoengineers.us/ecoforums. Link is in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. Here's your show. Hello. Welcome to Reversing Climate Change. This is Ross Kenyon, the host of the show. I work in climate tech and carbon dioxide removal. While I have you here, could you please open up your podcast app right now and give this show a great rating and review in Spotify or Apple Podcasts? A lot is taking place on Substack. The other podcast I'm working on, Climate Workers Anonymous, has a publication that's very active over there right now. And the podcast itself is being published through there. So you should follow Climate Workers Anonymous in whichever podcast app you use or on Substack. There's a lot of extra content on Substack if you like reversing climate change. The full transcript of episodes is being published on Substack, as well as extra commentary from me that didn't fit into the show. I'm just trying to use that platform a lot more. Of course, a lot takes place on LinkedIn as well, because this is a quote unquote a professional carbon removal podcast, but a lot's happening on Substack as well. Now, to get down to it, today's guest is Poppy Russell. If you work in carbon dioxide removal, you have probably seen Poppy's research. She is the research manager at Counteract VC. Counteract is a venture capital investor in carbon removal. If you haven't pitched to them previously, you certainly have worked with or spoken with companies that have or are part of their portfolio. Poppy puts out great research. I think her analysis often points to trends that other people will soon be talking about, but maybe haven't realized just yet. I respect Poppy's takes. They're often ahead of the curve and interesting. They're data-driven, and they're often done with a very nice visual style that makes it easy to absorb the synthesis of quite a lot of information. I'll put links to several of her articles in the show notes. You should go and check out her work as well as Counteract generally. And I'll just get right to the show with Poppy. Thanks for listening. Here it is. Poppy, this is your first podcast ever.
It is. What an honor.
An honor. Right to the top. You just cut the entire line. Thanks for being here. I've enjoyed your research and chatting with you for a long time now, and we had to do it.
Yeah, we did. We did. It's cool to be on it because I think when I started, or before I started working in the space, I did listen to some of the Reversing Climate Change podcasts. So yeah, it's fun to actually be talking on one. I think it was like Jennifer Wilcox's episode, which was probably a long time ago now, but it was a really interesting.
It was a very long time ago. I think it was when the CDR primer came out. So that, what even was that? I don't know. In the long ago. Poppy, when your writing comes out, I always make sure to read it because it's often pretty. I like that there's graphs involved. It's visual. There's also a lot of very serious analysis and data crunching that's happening in there. And I often find that you covered maybe trends that are not super visible to others. It's hard for you to acknowledge this without it seeming like you're patting yourself on the back. But this is an accurate summation of how you do your work. No?
Yeah, I guess like we have just an interesting lens on the carbon removal landscape based on just the number of companies that we speak to. So we've got a bit of a privilege in the type of access we have to different data, different models, different ideas. And so, yeah, part of our job is obviously filtering through a lot of that data and trying to understand trends that exist there within pathways, but also across carbon removal landscape as well. So yeah, definitely part of what we do at Counteract is trying to like put back into the ecosystem and sort of explain some of those trends that we see. And yeah, it's always nice to know that people are actually reading it. And yeah, often, have people come back to me and tell me like why the analysis is wrong or what I've missed, which is also like equally useful. So yeah, it's definitely a unique sort of lens that we have on the market, and yeah, it's a fun lens as well.
Do you ever get to say something very British like, it disappoints me to contradict you in this way, but I'm afraid it is you who are wrong? something very dour like that. Do you ever get to do that, or do you just go, interesting?
Interesting. Or yeah, I understand your point of view. Yeah, I mean, it's always difficult when you put out content with names attached to it, with company names, because everyone who's within a company have their very specific positioning. And so when they see themselves grouped with like some other companies, which they might themselves feel that they're very different to, you can get some pushback. And I think I always like receiving that pushback, but at the end of the day, like it's a category, and I'm not making a huge judgment that one category is bad or one category is good. It's just a way that we're grouping companies for the sake of it, that's helpful for us. So yeah, I find like that's always like a bit of it, that can be a bit of a tension when you're naming. And so you have to be a bit careful about it as well. And I'm sure I've made mistakes as always.
You're all individuals. Yes, we're all individuals in unison.
Yeah.
Yeah. But obviously, like, categories, they compress information in order to, note commonalities and divergences that are useful for some purpose, usually useful to the person who created the taxonomy is probably the person to whom it's most valuable. But I think if you're zoomed in enough to be one of those companies, maybe those distances start looking wider and wider to you because you're only in that one quadrant rather than you evaluating, judging everyone. What is worthy of investment from your distant ivory tower, Poppy?
Yeah. Yeah. But if you can explain why you're better than all of the other companies in that category, then that's a good thing, right?
That is a good thing. Yeah. I think if you're able to do that, I imagine it feels bad if you can't.
Yeah.
Then what? I mean, that's information too, though, right? Like, you should know that if you aren't that different from your rivals, then it's not insulting to know that. If someone points it out and it's true, it's your job to, I think, to find a way to hear that productively.
Sure. And if it's my understanding that's wrong of you, then it's also like a positioning, maybe a way that you're positioning yourself is not cutting through in the right way.
I work so much on strategic communications issues and positioning and branding. And how do you tell a story that shows asymmetry in a positive way that makes you stand out in a way that might look good for your company? I think I've just had hard lessons learned of some of the really fine-toothed ways of communicating. As a company, often people just do not internalize those differences. There's just so many companies to keep track of that they're only going to remember a couple of details about you unless they diligenced you for some reason or they got really interested in what you're doing specifically. Most of the time it'd be like, oh, but you do soil carbon. And then you have to be like, oh, well, we do this, but we also pair it with this and it works like this. And they're like, yeah, so it's just like soil carbon, right? I'm like, okay, fine. Sure. If that's the way that you need to understand it. I think people do get a little frustrated if you don't use their particular verbiage sometimes, or maybe they think that they're communicating successfully, but the listener is not wanting that much information. And so they aren't hearing it. Being misunderstood is not a good feeling.
No, it's not. And I can resonate with it in that, like, I will often, if I put out something to get like attention on LinkedIn, if it's the category, if it's a nice picture that like grabs someone's attention, but actually it's pointing to an article where there's all of that nuance is unpacked within it, then a lot of the time people are time constrained. They haven't read the detail within the accompanying analysis. So like, yeah, there's I resonate with that feeling as well.
Okay, counterpoint though, Poppy. Do you know the old adage that the fastest way to get good information is to intentionally say something wrong on the internet?
Oh, yeah, probably. As people will come back at you, telling you why you're wrong straight away. Is that what you do? Is that your special approach?
Oh, I'm wrong all the time, but it's always unintentional, I think. No, I think that does actually result in it. So like maybe given that your job is researching and this research is meant to filter into diligence work and creating a useful map of the ecosystem and where the world's going, you might be getting better information just by occasionally having a provocative taxonomy that pisses someone off. Maybe it works somehow. There's attention too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we had done some research on like the enhanced rock weathering space a couple of years ago, and the analysis is quite simple, like in the scheme of things for an approach which is like really complicated, but it was just sort of demonstrating to people where we saw some of the challenges in the enhanced rock weathering space, which sort of mainly was tied to it's really difficult to get unit costs down because you have a ton of material of which fraction of that you can charge for carbon credits for, and you realize that portion over quite a long space of time. And you have all of these costs associated with actually being able to get money for that removal, whether it's like getting the material, whether it's moving it to the area of land, whether it's measuring all of this, and whether it's also you're paying back your interest against the amount of capital that you've taken out for that project as well. So we put out like this analysis just to show, these are some of the things that we're concerned about in this space, and like a whole series of companies come back to me and explain like one, areas of which I've been wrong in the analysis, but two, like all of these different innovations that are actually happening to solve some of the key crunch points that we had identified. And so you're always like slightly ignorant to like the whole sphere of things that are going on, and it's getting the pushback from some of the stuff that you're putting out is always beneficial to understanding the space better. I don't think we weren't sort of intentionally being wrong, but I think we were being a bit provocative with saying that we think that the unit costs of enhanced rock weathering are really difficult to get right. And now a year and a half later, we've actually invested in a company in the space. For someone who'd come and had kind of answered like what we thought some of the key problems were in this really clever way. So that was a really cool example of how like putting out some research from our understanding has led to, a company that's sort of satisfying some of this stuff, coming towards us and saying, hey, I think I've got a solution that you might be interested in.
I love when entrepreneurs do things like that, assuming that they read this research and they did something that they wouldn't have otherwise have done, unless they were just doing it in isolation and then realize, oh, Counteract is looking for this, and I saw this. Oh, go ahead.
I think it was literally they had come to the same conclusions, and so they saw that what we'd put out. I don't think we changed. I don't think we made them do anything that they weren't doing before. But I think they saw us and were like, okay, they understand why our solution is interesting.
What's it like having your research not be additional?
Hey.
Sorry, Poppy. That's mean. No, I'm just kidding. It's nice to have that. I feel like independent confirmation of ideas like that is trustworthy. When I see people come to similar conclusions like that from different ways of getting there, I think that's really useful. I also love when entrepreneurs do engineer based upon criteria like that. Like, I think one of the mistakes a lot of entrepreneurs make is that they want to be first at something, like as the old Navy line goes, get there first with the most. And I think once companies make bets and they've already decided on what the future is going to look like, and if they have to go first, they are deployed and they've made staffing decisions and told their board what they're going to do with their money and stuff like that. And it becomes pretty hard to change. And then the companies that just wait and watch for a while, and they see, oh, there's an RFP that we can just engineer something specifically for, or these companies are all stuck into the wrong type of measurement and they've invested all this money in this. What if we did something else? I like it when companies are able to do that kind of go to market, or it's like build a company around like a demonstrated, these are the criteria.
Yeah. And I think we've definitely seen that kind of that trend over time in the carbon removal space, right? Over the last few years, where there was initially so much kind of white space and new carbon removal pathways and new technologies that like weren't really being commercialized. And then, sort of saw lots of companies arise filling a lot of those. And then the sort of next stage of companies have been like, okay, how are we going to create like a compelling business case around where removals is sort of part of that?
Yeah, I think whatever the next thing is that I found or co-found, if I do that again, I think I'm going to be looking for opportunities to be part of that second wave who watches where all the first wave companies got stuck. And you're like, okay, we're going to do something that builds on that but goes in a different direction. Because I watch those companies with a little bit of envy from Nori, where I'm like, ah, if only we still had that kind of optionality to redo everything in this kind of way. So
Yeah. What do
maybe
you think
next
the
time.
next space will be?
I don't know. I really don't. I don't know. That's your job. Aren't you supposed to? You're the pattern matcher. You're supposed to be telling me what the thing is to invest in with my career, with my time, with your money. What is good? You're
With
supposed
my
to. You're
money.
supposed to. Yeah,
It's
with
not my
with the
money.
with the money that you're closer to than I am. You're supposed to be making decisions, kind of. I don't know. What do you think is going to be the next thing, either in climate or carbon removal or things adjacent to it? What are you watching closely?
Hmm. Um, this isn't this isn't the best time to ask me this question.
No.
Um, but
Why? Is there ever a good time to ask this question? It's hard anytime you ask, I think.
it is hard anytime I ask. But yeah, I'm not I'm not doing so well at this question right now. Um, this is like a side. This is a side take. This is a side take to the podcast.
This is why you
Um,
asked me about it. So you wanted to buy yourself time so you could think while I was rambling. Great.
yeah. Okay.
It seems like it's going to be juicy, Poppy.
It's not. No, it's not going to be juicy. Um,
Oh, okay. So sad. Okay. But
well,
then,
yeah. I think I spend. Yeah, I'm really rambling here, so feel free to like chop a bunch of
no,
this
no.
out.
Hmm.
But I think so. Yeah, in like the venture capital space, like obviously it's quite clear where the trends of investment are going to right now, which is like, you know, electrification services, data for data centers for growing energy demand, because there is like a serious growing market there right now. You know, whether that's like a purely pre-seed space. Obviously, it's not a purely pre-seed space at the moment, but there's probably scope for a fair amount of innovation there. Um, then I think like one of the new trends that we're seeing is on this sort of conversation of toxicity, and detoxification. So this might be kind of interesting to you from your like Nori background, which is, you know, we have like a huge amount of toxic chemicals that we release into our food, water systems, and there's sort of growing understanding of how those chemicals are impacting our human health. And you know, you're seeing these links between cancer and toxic chemicals, as well as like hormonal regulations, fertility issues, and there's sort of growing research there, which is sort of tying particular chemicals to these sort of serious human health problems. Um, I'm kind of interested in it for the reason why, uh, you know, a lot of these chemicals that are harmful for humans are also harmful for climate. But like the sort of value proposition is more on the human health side, and then the climate side would be sort of a secondary benefit. And you know, so we're seeing sort of innovations there on like, yeah, pesticides and some of those agricultural inputs, but also you're seeing stuff in the, yeah, plastic, like microplastics space as well. And like being able to break them down or eliminate like some of the chemicals that are difficult to break down there. So that's like kind of an emerging sort of space that I'm curious by, but it's not like a hard climate tech space. It's just sort of something where you'll see significant benefits to climate and ecosystem, but the sort of driving force behind it is like a public health conversation.
I like that angle for various reasons. And I've also seen others working in climate focus that direction too. Like I saw that Deep Science Ventures is
Yeah.
focused on toxicity. I think that's really, I'm not
Yeah.
surprised that they are. It's a cool angle for them to pursue. I also like that it crosses political boundaries more, like in the same way this comes up on the show, like 1 in 3 episodes at this point. But one of the big marriages of convenience, seemingly from the second Trump administration, was RFK Jr. and Trump, and seeing how the glyphosate lawsuit and like Supreme Court case played out.
It's
And
crazy.
so like RFK clearly lost the battle of what to do with toxicity inside of, but like it never seemed like the guy who prides himself on eating McDonald's all the time was going to be aligned with the guy who has much stranger health proclivities, one might say.
Yeah.
But it was seeming like maybe one of those things that, parents especially of all political stripes care about making sure that their kids have less toxic environments. We all know at this point how bad things like lead have been for seemingly like all like behavioral criminality issues, sociological issues. Like so much of it is toxicity related. And if you're able to get upstream of that and eliminate some of these things, you might be solving problems that may take decades to truly show up. But of course, we're also living with, I mean, I've known so many people who have had fertility issues at this point. Maybe it's just people are talking about it more. Maybe I'm just like in that age demographic where people do talk about it more, where when you're in your 20s, you don't really hear about it
You
at
don't
all.
know.
Or you just don't know, yeah. But I feel like at this stage, like a lot of people are much more open, and culturally it's maybe more, so there's like some confounding variables that are happening in there. But toxicity is very much on the menu across the board, and I don't think it depends a ton on politics. So, and if there's climate benefits, I didn't even thought about that, but that's
Yeah.
just gravy.
Yeah. The climate benefits be secondary. Yeah. Obviously, like the sort of who's going to pay, and that was sort of that would be the question to answer. Um, but yeah, that's not a carbon removal related space, but something that's interesting. And in the carbon removal side, like we have seen like a significant drop off in like this pre-seed CDR companies. So I think we're maybe in a phase at the moment where just as like you said, you've got people who are maybe stopping and waiting to see how like the next year or so is going to play out, and where there are new opportunities, and yeah, most of the kind of pre-seed companies that we see that are like looking at carbon removal will not be saying that they are looking at carbon removal. So it's that's definitely like a positioning thing at the moment.
I'm only laughing because one, ADHD brain active, and then two, knowing that you're British, I was just thinking of the, is it funnier if it's carbon removal project and tech developers, or funnier if it's investors of go to the Winchester, have a pint, wait for this whole thing to blow over, do Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah. That's a fair point.
So if you were talking while I was thinking about that, it's just a point I'm going to have to relearn when I listen back to the show.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably the latter, right?
Oh, of investors just waiting? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Not that. Yeah. Not that like that's what we're doing.
Yeah. How does that work with investors where you have like duty of care requirements legally of making sure companies that, especially if you're on the board of and have liability, of making sure that you're stewarding them in a way that is appropriate, but also there's a lot of companies within similar categories of carbon removal that I imagine you'd like to invest in, and maybe sometimes their interests overlap in ways that might be conflicting. How do you think about that? Is it good to invest in 10 different biochar companies or something like that, or you just get one bite at the apple and then have to move on?
We try and do maybe it's more helpful to just discuss like a kind of broader approach when we're looking at companies. So and what our kind of investment mandates are. But yeah, we look for like a sort of, as a very, very focused fund, which is sort of specializing in carbon removal, like and um, we try and introduce as much diversity as possible in the types of companies that we're supporting. So yes, that of course means like the sort of carbon removal mechanism, but it also means like geographies. It also means business models as well. And yeah, it might be, you know, whether they're sort of an input provider or whether they're sort of a market enabler. Like we try and cover as much diversity as we can. And then we also look for companies that we'd call catalytic. And for us, that means like either, you know, some foundational IP that's like really moving the needle on some specific problem in a technology space. So in direct air capture, that might be, you know, on the energetic side, significantly lowering the energy costs. And then we also look at kind of new pathway enablers. So something that we think is new in the space and might unlock like a whole different mechanism for carbon removal. So companies in our portfolio like Crew Carbon or Carbon Run. So, you know, Carbon Run are looking at dosing rivers with limestone and doing this river restoration that also removes carbon at the same time. And Crew Carbon are doing a similar thing in wastewater treatment. Actually, like Crew Carbon and Carbon Run and like their fundamental mechanism are like quite similar. Like they're ultimately introducing limestone into an acidic water source and removing CO2 in that way. And, you know, this from a sort of MRV and a data perspective and sort of efficiency perspective, they will have like some similar findings from the technology space. But, you know, from how they're going to go to market and the way they're going to position themselves is completely different. Like Crew Carbon are looking at wastewater industry and they're looking at how can they improve the efficiency that wastewater treatment plants run at, and where can we reduce costs to wastewater treatment plants. Carbon Run are looking at like how can we it's actually a bit more of like a nature-based solution in its philosophy. Like it's like how can we restore acidic rivers that will provide like, you know, boost salmon populations, it provides a nicer space to live. And they've actually got a lot more of a kind of lean in from like a resilience and sort of ecosystem protection perspective. So yeah, they're two companies that like the fundamentals of what they're doing are very similar, but you know, the way that they scale will be completely different. And you know, they're both in our portfolio, and you know, we'll make sure that like we market everyone into other investors and to like the broader carbon removal ecosystem in the way that it most makes sense for them. So, you know, the type of investor who might be interested in Crew Carbon will probably not be interested in someone like Carbon Run, because it's one's very industrial and one's sort of more on the nature restoration side. Did that answer the question? I think it did.
Yeah, I think so. It's one way to split it. But one thing that's came up on the show recently has been, I've been thinking about how you could categorize companies as being in the alkalinity gang or not. And maybe we don't ever talk about, well, we do alkalinity based carbon removal, because then people be like, well, so does almost everyone, or like half of it. If you take biochar out, it's mostly alkalinity based.
Yeah. So. Carbon removal is climate change is an acidity problem, and carbon removal is finding loads of sources of alkalinity to counteract that acidity. And yeah, like everyone is leveraging alkalinity in one way or another in the space. So yeah, it's probably not the easiest separation there. Like anyone could argue they're an alkalinity company. Um, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
massive sources of alkalinity. That's also been a space that we've been interested in investing in. So we have a couple of companies in our portfolio that are like really not carbon removal companies, but they generate byproducts that like alkaline byproducts that could be really useful for CDR. So that company called Magrathea, and they're producing magnesium from brines, but they have a magnesium hydroxide byproduct that could be a feedstock to be leveraged in the CDR space. But their business models around making metal or extracting metal.
I think this ties in really nicely with your work on industrial tie-in. That's something that I think you're fairly bullish on. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, it's been like an interesting conversation over the last couple of years, like where carbon on how carbon removal is going to be scaled in industry, and where is there like strategic value to be had by industries in within carbon removal landscape. So yeah, I think it's industrial integration like kind of means like quite a lot of things. I think there's like lots of ways to do it. And I think some of the neatest companies that we see are the ones that are being able to like explain their value to industrial or provide real value to an industrial company. And we see it in a few different ways. So you have companies that are leveraging and valorizing like true waste. So yeah, materials that are like costly to dispose of, and tapping into those. Then you have companies that are like providing useful products that to industry that have like material value, but also might have like carbon sequestered in them. And then you also have like companies that might improve some process efficiency in one way or another. So like I mentioned crew carbon earlier, but they're an example of that, where they're doing carbon removal, but the sort of buy-in from industry is because they're kind of improving the wastewater treatment process. But yeah, companies who can like integrate and explain their value to industry really well, we're seeing like have some quite interesting progress. And yeah, happy to go into more detail there. I think my favorite example at the moment is a company called Viteris, and they are their main product is a carbonated cement alternative, and the process is they take CO2 from point source, so it might be from like a bio CCS, but it also could be from like a cement flue stream, and they create this carbonated material that a cement company can displace some of their cement, integrate it, and that material releases CO2 slowly over time, and it improves the strength and durability of the concrete. That's like the angle of why they're sort of providing an interesting product, but like they also have some other kind of neat things in their business model where the feedstock that they're using is gypsum. So gypsum's this like really annoying sort of nuisance waste material, which has like got very high disposal costs associated with it. And they're taking that, valorizing it. And then they also produce a potassium sulfate fertilizer. And so actually like their core revenues are driven from the fertilizer sale, but they've got this really nice, like valuable material that's like interesting to cement companies. And I think that that's sort of a really nice example of a company that's fitting into industry and also able to like use another revenue stream to sort of be able to reduce their costs on the carbon side. The cement company can decide how they use that like embedded carbon, like whether they use it for their compliance reasons or whether or elsewhere. or just claim it's a carbon benefit.
They seem like they have probably better than average odds of survival. That's
Yeah.
pretty neat.
Yeah. So I think there's the industrial integration side is going to be helpful for companies in the near term, like if they can show that value.
What's an example of something that you're feeling bearish on right now?
Um,
You can be as mean as you want,
I
Poppy.
don't like to be mean.
You don't want to disappoint anyone. Well, people are just going to infer from what you just said that if they don't have an industrial integration possible to them, that you're being mean to them. So there's really no way out of this.
It's definitely easier. Like if you're going down the venture capital route of raising money, it's easier to have that industrial partner. Like, it's definitely not the only way that you can survive. And like biochar companies, for instance, that you have other financing routes available to you. If you have your project and like can get your offtake agreements and you sell your biochar, like you can start to finance your projects in other ways. So like it's definitely not the only way to survive, but if you're trying to raise it on the venture side, like you definitely want to show that like industrial buy-in. I guess I'm embarrassed on some of the ocean CDR stuff. Like, I know it's
You're
early
in
days
trouble,
of that.
Poppy. You're in trouble. Early days, yeah. Sorry, continue.
It's kind of too early, so it's a bit of a cop out anyway to say that. But I've been quite skeptical of the ocean CDR stuff.
All of it, or just like alkalinity focused dosing approaches? Something else?
Yeah, I think also I've been skeptical on the direct ocean capture side as well. Like you often hear this sort of phrase around the concentration of CO2 in water. It's so much higher than in air. But it's also like your mass concentration of CO2 in water is like significantly lower than it is in air. So you have to move a lot more mass to capture the same amount of CO2. So that I've always found like a sort of interesting challenge. And I think, you can find ways around it. Like you can partner with companies that are already like infrastructure that's already moving and pumping water. But the scale of that, like on the scheme of things, and we're talking about the sort of amount that we want carbon removal to scale to, is quite small. I think I did maths a while ago that it was like 7 to 10 million tons total potential if you partner with all of the sort of existing water moving infrastructure.
Wow. Okay. What's another thing that you're bullish about, Poppy? I'm like unpacking all of your research in rapid fire way now.
I am interested in I think one of my like sarcastic answers for like what my favorite carbon removal approach is planting trees. But I have been quite interested in some of the synergies that like these large sort of nature-based project developers might have with sort of more novel carbon removal approaches. And one of the sort of dynamics that we think about when we're looking at carbon removal projects is what we call the carbon curve. So the sort of sequestration profile of which like a project removes carbon over its lifetime. So, you have a project which is like, maybe a forestry project where you have this sort of slow buildup of carbon over time. And that's like quite difficult to finance because you have this period at the start where you don't have anything to to buy or sell. And yeah, I think that these like large project developers have quite an interesting opportunity for integrating some different carbon removal pathways that might also need like land that have a different carbon sequestration curve. It means that some of these project developers will be able to tap into revenues sooner than their sort of initial project expected. So that's kind of something that I've been sort of mulling over recently. And I think that, there's an opportunity in some of the mineralization approaches here, like particularly in enhanced rock weathering, where you have your front-loaded carbon removal sequestration profile. Like most of your removal happens in the first couple of years. So yeah, that could be like an interesting opportunity for integration there.
I mean, enhanced weathering would have to issue some credits in order to see that happen. But
yeah, I mean, there's a suite of other challenges in the enhanced rock weathering space, but I think that that's an opportunity, and I think particularly enhanced rock weathering companies that are leveraging approaches that mean the minerals are reactive and actually weather very quickly and have a higher signal, they might have an opportunity there.
I do like seeing more project developers focus on having multiple different pathways to carbon removal or just other types of environmental attribute crediting available to them. Varaha has been really interesting to me. It's cool seeing Residual do stuff like this. It's also cool if you can see the same or nearby project sites sort of like cycling into each other to level out the revenue curve that they have accessible to them. I think companies that have not yet figured out that issuance speed is very, very important for a myriad reasons.
Yeah, there's stuff that like we don't really know yet, and like for example, I've just said quite a diplomatic answer about the enhanced rock weathering space, which I have like traditionally been really bearish on, but like we've just invested in a company that I think is quite cool.
You can say you're bearish on policy. You kind of started off with that a little bit too. You're like a decade away, might as well be like on the moon, basically.
It's also not diplomatic right now. I don't know why I'm trying to be diplomatic. But
I say deflating things about policy on a regular basis on here. I'm like the voice of, I don't know if the political trends are going to be that good. I don't know, like you're in the UK, like I'm sure you're watching Reform and being like, like UK ETS stuff. Yeah. Like is Farage gonna touch this thing? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're thinking about that.
I am slightly bearish on policy at the moment. And I think, we've been interested in this sort of evolving compliance case for removals and how and when that's going to come in. And we've had some really exciting news in Europe around the sort of integration of removals into the EU emissions trading scheme, where they've sort of allocated this 250 million tons of removals in the next decade. But I think there is a huge caveat in that that announcement, which is like just around the price gap between removals and the carbon price. And I think where we say it's really, really difficult to project the ETS, the future of the carbon price like right now, because there is so much political uncertainty around it. And we've seen the ETS also make some adjustments in the last couple of weeks that are sort of delaying the sort of speed at which they're sort of targeting this sort of decarbonisation. And that's obviously a smart political move, but it does mean that like the future of that carbon price is really uncertain. So whereas I think they're showing that there's going to be this use case for removals in the carbon market, in the compliance carbon market, in the future, like in the near term, I think we can still be, I'm a bit bearish on the degree in which that actually supports removals. So there we go. Yes, there's another thing I'm a bit bearish on.
Whenever I've said bearish things about carbon removal, I think those are the times when people complain to me the most. I've heard like, why are you, what use does it serve to be pessimistic in this way? Or like, don't you need to know if that's a possibility or a reality? And I don't want it to be that way, but I'm also, me saying something doesn't impact whether or not it's real or not.
Well, you need to be pragmatic as well. And I think that, I think being pragmatic around that side of things, like, will mean that, you know, some of this stuff on the business model innovation that we spoke about already, you know, there'll be more of a push for that, like, for that side of innovation. And that's the stuff that's really got this, that's going to be really scalable and sustainable, because like, it's not going to be reliant on some of these future prices. And that will just be a nice additional option to tap into.
I see where your head's at. The investment thesis, according to Poppy Russell, is very obvious to me. Thanks for being here, Poppy. Was it an okay first podcast experience for you? You survived.
I survived. I hope that people don't come at me.
They're going to come at you for sure.
Yeah, I don't like us answering the bullish and bearish questions, particularly on a carbon removal podcast. It's been around for all of this time and has all of this carbon removal following. So
you could have just said you're bearish on reversing climate change, and then I would have been like, and stop button is here. Okay.